Thank you, Jason. New information from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources shows the agency was tracking issues with Washington County injection wells for months before shutting down 4 wells last week. But one local geologist says the state's response still is not matching the urgency on the ground.
According to ODNR, a production well owner reported increased pressure to the agency in October 2025. An inspector confirmed elevated pressure and fluid in nearby wells, kicking off months of record reviews, inspections, and meetings between regional supervisors. By June, the division had drafted suspension orders, though it never had to issue them. The owners agreed on July 1st and 2nd to voluntarily shut down 4 injection wells: Redbird number 4 and number 5, American Growers number 1, and Nichols number 1A. For David Jeffrey, a Marietta College geologist who's been monitoring the situation locally, the timeline reads less like due diligence and more like delay.
It's already gotten to the point that we know that stuff is coming up to the surface, and the reason you're injecting the brines is to put them in a place where they're securely trapped and will never escape. As soon as they were aware the fluids were not staying where they intended, the whole operation should have been just shut down. So instead we get delays, more testing, and the voluntary shutdowns are just not enough.
Jeffrey says that the evidence suggests Washington County's geology is and has been unfit for injection due to numerous underground fractures, caused both by natural geologic activity and the numerous orphan wells left behind by over a century of oil and gas extraction.
There are fractures that are clearly coming up those 2,000 to 3,000 feet through the Ohio Shale. Is a super thick formation that is the formation that everybody would have thought, oh, well, that's going to be the seal. That's going to be the thing that's going to hold that stuff down there. But the material is getting through. So there's clearly open fractures.
ODNR previously investigated brine migration from the Redbird number 4 injection well in 2020, ultimately determining that the fluid had made its way into neighboring oil and gas production wells. At that time, the company's solution was to inject into a deeper geologic formation. Jeffrey says just drilling deeper isn't a sustainable solution then and won't be now.
The deeper you go, the older the rocks are, and the more they've been exposed to tectonic processes that would break and fracture the rocks. So the deeper rocks are going to be even more fractured than the ones that are shallower. So I would say when they said, okay, drill to a deeper formation, maybe it'll stay down there, that was wishful thinking. So that was not, and now we know that that didn't work.
ODNR notes that the 2020 investigation found no impact to private drinking water wells, which sit much shallower than oil and gas wells involved. The agency is still finalizing a contract for a new water well study near the latest affected area. The advocacy group, Buckeye Environmental Network, is pushing ODNR to go further, calling for a county-wide investigation rather than testing limited to wells near the latest complaints. The agency says pressure monitors are now in place on several affected wells, and it will determine next steps based on the results of the water well study. Deep Rock Disposal Solutions, which owns American Growers number 1, said the company has seen no evidence that brine is migrating from the well, adding that ODNR's data point to, quote, alternative explanations that need to be investigated further, unquote. In Washington County, Chase Campbell, WTAP News.